guys have heard, I am the first registered nurse to use a wheelchair in all of New York State. And to be the first, often you will know at the top, it is lonely, right? And to pave a path of loneliness and to be that person to advocate and start to actually lay the groundwork for someone else, there must be a background that has given you some type of strength to be able to get through that. So I'm going to start with my education side of this so that you guys can understand the full picture of what it took for me to actually be here today speaking with all of you. And that really starts with the impact moment of my life, being diagnosed with transverse myelitis at the age of 5. It's a neurological disorder that affects the spinal cord. And by the time I was 12 years old, I was using a wheelchair full time. Now, if anybody remember back to the time that they were 12 years old, you are in the mix of life. Everything is happening. You are changing the way you see the world. You are a teenager. You are finding your own respect to what life is, and you're rebelling against whatever parents are saying, and you're trying to maintain grades while having a social life. And to have the disruption of a new diagnosis or a diagnosis that has progressed to the point where now you are considered different, you are also now dealing with self-identity and how that looks. How does that gain and how does that navigate a world where back in the early 2000s, disability was often shuttered and never seen? Today, we see a little bit more of it. But if you think back to those early 2000s, late 1990s, which I'm giving my age away, I'm young, but at the same time, it is an age timestamp saying, wait a minute, I didn't see people with disabilities all in our commercials. This isn't something that was fully immersive. So for me at the time, I didn't see anyone that looked like me. How do I believe that I can be? Well, I was in high school, and I can tell you that was the first time that I was told I had 3 strikes. It was a pivotal moment. I decided that I was going to not take the school bus. And I wanted to go to the corner store to get a bacon, egg, and cheese. I'm from New York, so that is one word, bacon, egg, and cheese. Okay. I wanted to go to the corner store with my friends and get my bacon, egg, and cheese and come back to school. Well, on that roll back to school, I was caught by the principal being told that because I have a disability, I am not allowed to leave school grounds once school has started or I've gotten off of the yellow bus. I had to be in the building with the rest of the kids that have any type of IEP or disability function because it was a liability to the school just in case anything happened to me. So I said, I don't believe this, call my mom. And thankfully, my mom had my back at that time and said, well, give her a Metro card, and promptly told me at the same time that if I was ever late to school for any reason, that I would end up back on that yellow school bus. Well, I had a point to prove, and the point was that I didn't need to be on the yellow school bus and that I was just as capable as any one of my friends, not understanding the actual structures and the obstacles that come with the disability, the progressive disability, and now adding that to getting to school on time, making sure that when there's an ice storm, a snowstorm, I'm in New York City once again, snowstorm, ice storm, we don't close for an inch of snow, we close at 10 inches of snow. How am I getting to school and how am I getting there on time? And having to navigate that world on top of being a student and trying to find my identity among my peers. I was lucky enough that my peers had my back. If I needed the extra push through the snow, that they were there. If I needed help, they had no issues helping me. But the thing was, I was the only one of my peers that had a disability that actually hung out with them after school at an after school program. So now I wasn't seen as different. I was seen as just someone that needed extra help. So my peers were more than capable of saying, hey, we can help you. Or if I was okay with asking and I felt comfortable enough to ask one of my peers, they were willing to more than enough step up. Sometimes you get the no, but there's more than enough of them to help. And so there's more than enough times that I've been able to ask and not always receive rejection. So getting past those earlier years, I told you about my 3 strikes. My principal said, I'm pretty, I'm a woman, and I have a disability. That doesn't mean that I will get very far in life. My disability alone will say that I can only go to a community college, maybe 2 years. If I'm lucky, 4 years. I will live on Social Security, and that, the perspective on my life is not longevity. that I can take my pretty face and get away with a lot now, but it won't take me further into a career. I said, watch me. And on graduation day, I said, watch me again. I took a gap year before going into college, not understanding what I was going to do, but I did know I wanted to create change. So I thought that I was going to become a doctor at that time, and I was going to find the cure for pain. Well, again, I faced many challenges in the educational system, just trying to get into the door. If I'm going to take on becoming a doctor, that means I need to be put into classes that have chemistry and biology and all of the STEM programs that we think about, but at the same time are not made for someone who has a disability, because oftentimes schools are thinking about someone who can walk and who will be standing for 12 hours or who can lift 50 pounds and all of the job description things that we put on and put out to those in our communities saying that here we're hiring. But now we do that at an educational level, saying, well, if you can't meet the demands at an educational level, then you won't be able to make the level at a workforce level. How is that possible that we take what the workforce wants and enforce it onto the education instead of just giving someone the education to get through? That means that we're placing our own biases on someone's educational performance. Well, I didn't let that settle for me. I graduated with a biology and neuroscience degree and still didn't know what I wanted to do with life, because I no longer wanted to be a doctor. I no longer wanted to be able to say to someone, no, you'll never walk again. No, you'll never be able to do something again, because technology is ever advancing. We know today that technology is not what it was in 2000 or in 1990 or in the 1950s. And every day there's something new coming about. So how would it look for me to go back into a room as a doctor to say to someone that they'll never be able to do something again when technology can change in 6 months? We don't know what we're saying can impact someone's own projection on their life based on how we see them, or based on how we ourselves internalize what we or we wouldn't do in any case or any scenario. We project it over to someone. So I was like, I can't be a doctor. What do I do? A nurse told me, well, why don't you become a nurse? Again, back in the early 2000s, late 2000s, I did not see anyone in nursing. I've had over 37 surgeries. I've had numerous hospital stays. I've had many teams take care of me throughout my life. And not one of my nurses had a visible disability or a disability that led on that I knew that they had it. Never seen it. So then, how can I see myself in that position? I got the application to nursing school. It took me a year to actually submit it. Subconsciously, I knew there was never a nurse like me. But then again, I didn't even know if I would get accepted. My grades were good enough. 4.0 average. I had to maintain a perfection status in order to be seen as equal. Perfect is hard to maintain, especially as a female. We're putting a lot of stress on ourselves every single day just to be forward facing to the world. Now add perfection to that just to be seen as equal. I have to do that every day. I have to be on time, be 15 minutes early, because if I'm late, then they're going to put it on my disability. They're not going to see me as the woman first. They're going to put it on my disability, and I can't let that happen. So I'm like, I don't understand how I'm ever going to be a nurse. I never see it. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't even know how to be a nurse. But fine, I put in the application. I get accepted. On my first day of nursing school orientation, it's a mandatory orientation. And my professors at the time call me out of the classroom and say to me, we don't think you can be a nurse. Our hospital partners will not accept you. You may be an infection control risk, and you can leave for the day and we'll get back to you. Well, me understanding that it's a mandatory orientation meant that I was not going to leave that class that day so that they can prolong another semester for me. Why would I do that? I've already finished 4 years of college. My grades are good enough. I'll wait. We can discuss after class and figure out a plan. Okay, after class comes and they're now talking to me about what accommodations will you need? I've never been a nurse before. I have no idea what I'm about to get into, but yet you're asking me what accommodations I'm going to need. That doesn't make sense to me. Isn't there some type of law that covers me? Well, in between all of this educational stuff, I also was Miss Wheelchair New York 2015, which is an advocacy platform for women here in New York City to advocate on behalf of those in the disability community. At the time, my slogan or motto was life, liberty, and the pursuit of access. And I understood what that meant in terms of education. It meant that I had the door open once you've given me an acceptance. You cannot close it. So I said it to them. I said, well, I've already been accepted. It's no longer on my terms as to how I'm going to get through this. It's on you to go back to your partners and tell them that you've accepted a student with a disability, and it's now their turn to pick up the ball and make sure that I can get into that building, get into that facility, make sure that those clinical practices are accessible enough for me to be there. Stop blaming me for me having a disability. Well, that didn't fare well for the professors because now they're frantic and trying to figure out in an evidence-based practice how it is that they're going to be able to explain disability when they're used to sending home students that have a cast on their arm for 6 weeks, or making someone prolong their graduation if they have a disability or acquire one throughout the semester. I had no idea what I was up against, but every time I went to class, again, I was no longer a student, but an advocate for myself first, my patients second, and my education third. I had to maintain perfectionism. I couldn't get less than a 90 on any test because I couldn't let them see my disability as something that was going to hinder me in some way, shape, or form. Stay under the radar. If I get good grades, no one's going to come and talk to me about something I can't do because my grades should be good enough. If I go into a clinical practice and a nurse manager says, well, she's an infection risk, I'm the first one to pipe up and say, well, show me in evidence where that is even stated. Where does my wheelchair say that? Does someone who uses crutches, where does it say that? Show me the paperwork, show me the research. A lot of times we talk to people and we think that what we say is true without having anything in the background to back it up. It's actually perception. It's what we think versus what we know. And it's something that I had to fight for all throughout my education. Let's fast forward a little bit to after graduation. I graduated. I passed my boards with one shot. 75 questions was the minimum you needed to pass out of 265, and I passed in 75 questions on the first shot. It was the first time ever that someone in our class had done that less than in taking the test, taking their boards 2 weeks after graduation. I needed to prove a point once again, that you weren't just going to see my disability and automatically bias me into thinking that my disability was supposed to hinder me. No, my disability actually gave me the courage and the strength to move forward because I had already been dealing with something that no one understood: chronic pain, making sure that I had to be perfect, and making sure that the 3 strikes that I was told about was never going to be the label that someone can actually give me and be successful with keeping it that way. It was for me to take over. It was for me to say whether or not I can be hindered or whether or not I can move forward. I didn't see it as an obstacle I needed to get around or get over. It was an obstacle that I needed to solve, and I solved it. And I made sure that those around me didn't take it as an offense, not as a in your face, but in a moment of understanding that your own mortality is something that you cannot push onto someone else. You have to understand what you can and cannot do versus saying someone can or cannot do it by what I think they can and cannot do based on what you think you can do for yourself. So passing forward, past all of this, I've graduated. Now I'm trying to find a job. I am going through all of the avenues to apply for work. I have beat the odds. I now have higher education as a Black woman. I am now pushing through with my baccalaureate degree. I have more than enough proven that I'm capable of doing the job because clinical practice in lower education. But I went through 76 interviews, 76 rejections in trying to find clinical placement so that I can become an ICU nurse and go on and get my PhD in CRNA, which is being a registered nurse anesthetist, meaning that I'd be like an anesthesiologist, just on a nursing side. 76 interviews and no clinical placements. I had no idea what I was going to do. I just went through nursing school. I have nursing bills to pay. We all have student loans that need to get reduced. And here I am again, faced with the fact that the statistics of those with disabilities having employment is less than 16% of the entire nation. What am I going to do with this? I have proven everything, and here I am again trying to prove a point that I can do it, and yet someone else is looking at me saying, we don't know if you can. I was given the opportunity to have any desk job I wanted because, again, behind a desk, they can hide you away. They don't have to deal with anything, and we can kind of figure out how to scuttle around any situation. Whereas for what I wanted was to be right there in active patient care. I wanted to be right there where patients can see me and know that life goes on after a diagnosis. That when the doctor says, no, you'll never walk again, no, you'll never be able to do this again, that might not actually be true. And that you can get a little bit of hope just by seeing someone else that has a disability still living their life. Because we don't see that. It's not part of our representation on our TVs and our magazines and just everyday walking around. That's what I wanted. So the pandemic hits, 76 interviews have passed, and all of a sudden, a hospital finally puts up their HR number saying that they are in desperate need of nurses. I call. Our governor has just put out that they needed nurses to come out of retirement. So hospitals are desperate. They need people. They've got to hire me. Well, they did. I got hired. And I'm talking to my preceptor right after that getting hired, saying they haven't seen me yet. HR is going to see me and say it's fine. But that nurse manager is probably going to say, no way. And she says to me, remember what's on the bottom of every website or every business model is that EEOC statement, equal opportunity employment statement, that says that we equally employ anyone who's a woman, a veteran, military, have disabilities, sexual orientation, anything and everything we allow for. So hold their hand to the fire if you've already been hired. Same thing like if the application for the nursing program initially was you cannot close the door once you've already been accepted because now you have a case. I never thought about it like that. I don't want a case. I don't want to go to fight for something, because if you think about it, if I'm going to court or I'm filing a complaint, it's not for me to get the job. It's for the next person behind me to get the job. It's for the next person to now have a pathway to get through. It's not for me anymore. I'm giving that up if I'm going to court. I'm now going to be blackballed if they know that my name is anywhere near attached to some type of court saying that I'm holding an institution responsible for discrimination. Nobody wants to be a part of that. They run. So again, I have to hold a level of professionalism while also understanding the puzzle pieces that will work in my favor and won't work in my favor. So therefore, I am now afraid. I don't know what to do. And I'm just like, I just show up. That's all I can do is show up and be me. And when I showed up, I was actually asked what accommodations I would need. And I said, I have no clue what I'm about to face during COVID. So just give me a minute. And as soon as I know, I will let you know. Fine. I get to the unit that night. I work overnights, and the unit manager comes to me and says, I don't think you can work on this floor. I'm pretty sure you'll spread COVID to all the rest of the patients. I said, well, HR didn't have a problem. Your nurse educator didn't have a problem. So I'm going to ask that you go back and speak with them, because I don't think that this conversation is appropriate for the floor right now. I'm going to get back to work. Let me know if you need to pull me. She didn't pull me that night, but that night I already had respiratory ventilation education from my everyday life. My peers who have disabilities, who use ventilators every day, I already had that knowledge. That didn't have to come to me for being a nurse. That night, we had 3 patients on the floor who are on vents, and none of the nurses on that floor were vent nurses. They were ortho nurses, those that dealt with bones and surgeries. They had no idea what they were looking at, but we were overflowed, and all of a sudden, here I am swooping in to save the day. I know vents. They gave me the vent patients. I was able to handle that without respiratory therapy that evening. And then all of a sudden, the nurses are singing my praises to the nurse managers and the unit nurses and the chief nursing officer, saying she knows this stuff already. She deserves to be here. Keep her here. She kept us afloat all night. I got shipped to the ICU right after that. I was an ICU nurse for 4 months during COVID. And that was all because I knew outside knowledge, not knowledge that was given to me in an educational setting, but knowledge because of the fact that I had this in my own world. Things that I've grew up around. Disability allows you to have a door that's into a perspective that's not often seen. So therefore, I use that knowledge to my advantage. And that's what kicked off my career. I realized after COVID that I didn't actually want to be in a hospital setting anymore. Nurses don't have to be in a hospital setting, that nurses can actually open the door to other types of entrepreneurial exports and places. And being at the bedside may seem as though where we need to be, but not where we have to be. And then that's where I started off 4 businesses. I started off with the seated nurse, me, but it became instantly the seated position where I helped those around me understand STEM programs and how to get accommodations through education and then into the workplace as needed. I started speaking about what accessible accommodations actually were to persons who'd never thought they had a disability to begin with. I started letting them see on that pathway to career opportunities what it meant to not fill out that form. If you have a disability, check no, maybe, yes, and then all of the input that says what a disability actually equates to. And if you actually read it, we all then have a disability because it's saying hypertension, diabetes, MS, lupus, struggles walking. And I'm like, wait a minute. If we are all saying that we have a disability and no one is actually making sure that we are able to actually have them come in the door because we have this EEOC statement, then how are we actually functioning culturally in this blue collar atmosphere? This always hands-on, always working, always trying to make sure that we're turning the tables to allow for those workers to come in the door. I realized then that the seated position kind of had to expand, and the Solera project was born, and that was with me and a couple of my peers here in New York, where we realized hospitality was at the baseline. Hospitality needed to understand the language of medicine in order to kind of get out of their own bias. We opened the door for those around us who wanted to be behind a desk in a hotel, but still greeting servers. We wanted to make sure that those that were coming out of STEM and organic chemistry classes, mathematics classes, statistics classes had those accessible accommodations on their computers so that when they went to employers, they knew how to speak on their own about the accommodations that they already have set and how that can be transferred into the actual workplace and physical environment. We know today that remote work has picked up so much and has allowed for people with disabilities to actually get into the workforce for the first time in over 40 years. Like, it has been a transformational movement of what's been happening, especially for myself. Like I said, I'm no longer in the traditional nursing sense, but I'm consulting for 2 private schools at the moment. I'm also part of the Solera project, and I run a non-for-profit gym called the Access Project, which has a medical model that allows for patients and elderlies to come into our building, make sure that their medications are given in a timely manner, make sure that they are able to stay on track, and also provide trainers that understand disability and movement, and make sure that all of our equipment is fully accessible to their needs with all the adaptive equipment already in place. It is going through their insurance program versus out of pocket. So those that are low income or on tight budgets do not have to worry about payment. I have made sure that those that have an educational component, if they're younger, make sure that they have the backbone it needs to be able to speak up and advocate for themselves. Now I've been in the medical model and talking to different nurses and different chief nursing officers about how language has impacted the way we see people. When we ask for an accommodation and on that accommodation, it says, can you stand for 12 hours? And the doctor puts no. Well, can the person sit for 12 hours? Can they use their cane for 12 hours? Can they use their walker for 12 hours? If those answers are yes, just cross out standing, can use mobility device as needed for this amount of time. Because now you're seeing the active part of this person versus seeing the negative part of this person and what they supposedly cannot do. We're opening up the language to make sure that we're being inclusive and not being exclusive to those that we think are the only ones that can do the job. I've been speaking about adding the A to DEI because oftentimes we think that diversity equity and inclusion automatically includes accessibility, but accessibility means so much and it's so different, vastly different to so many people that we have to understand exactly what the basics are within the ADA laws and the 504 rehabilitation sections first, before we can actually make sure that we're opening the door in the right way to include people without actually throwing our biases or our perceptions onto them. Again, this transcended from educational standpoints all the way through my career. I've seen it in every single section, how biased points, instead of having the language, propel or reject people. I see it today when we think about how media and representation show those with disabilities in an inspirational light, what they're already doing. And don't take this for granted. I love being the inspiration to people. I love being able to give someone that spark of hope where if I can do it, they can do it. Yes, this is great. But we also have to make sure that the pathway is accessible. And the only way to do that is to make sure that all of my words that are being said, all of these things that I am teaching, all of the impact points that I've already made from education, higher education, and career point means that someone else doesn't have to go through this. I say that because in 1980, a name that I would love for you guys to remember is Gloria Ramsey. She's the first African-American woman who went through nursing school using a motorized wheelchair for the time. Gloria Ramsey is an amazing support system in my life. And the first time I found her was actually 2 years ago. After I graduated nursing school, I finally found her and I was like, well, why isn't your name known? She said to me, Andrea, accessibility is not known. So therefore, my disability won't be known nationally. It will be known locally. And that made me start to think, well, why am I not using my social media platforms more to advocate on behalf of having accessible pathways into careers, and who was often the time the first to do it? I was the first for New York State, so I'm definitely not going to let my name go, and I'm not going to let others in my state think that they can't do it. She's out in DC, and she's still pioneering ways for other people to get into the system while also making sure that at the top of her game, she's inclusive to her students. She teaches at Johns Hopkins, and she just recently retired. Gloria Ramsey actually paved the way for me without me even knowing it. And the thing is, all of her research now is paving the way for others to be able to come into the nursing school, because now I consult for nursing schools who are often asking, how do we accommodate students? And I'm saying, you're asking the wrong question. We're not how we accommodate, it's how best can we help them achieve, right? The person will tell us how their accommodations will be set. It's our job now to make sure that they can achieve what it is that they wish to achieve in our space. So whatever business we have, we want to make sure that they can best achieve what they need to achieve while with us and help them to grow. If they stay with us, that's what we want. It's great. And if they move on, we've given them the tools to be able to be successful somewhere else, because we've already laid the foundation. So be the first, just like I was the first. And I think that that's the main focus. Is if you're going to be the first and you're going to pave the path, make sure that that path is well paved.